Hi everyone, this is Federico from Middlewave Studio, and today I wanted to do a bit of a different video and I want to talk about what I think is what makes modern metal productions really great, and that is layering, the sauce. And that's what I think separates amateur productions from pro ones, really great ones, and that is because to get those really big sounding records, to have those interesting little moments, you need to add stuff, you need to layer stuff, layer sounds, interesting sounds with more usual ones. And today I wanted to show you some of these layering techniques I applied to my band's song, My Weakness. And just so you know what we're working with, let's just have a quick listen to the song. So really heavy and fast track, but even in this case you can add a lot of stuff to make it interesting. So I wanted to start first with guitars, and the usual thing to do is to do quotes on top of main rhythms, and that's something that I don't really like to do for the complete duration of the song. So I just did in some parts, and some of those are regular quotes, some of them are a bit of an odd thing, and I'm gonna show you right now what I'm talking about. So the main rhythms sound like this. So very gainy, very scooped. And in some parts of the song I added regular quads, but also added octave down guitars to make those parts feel bigger. So the first quads sound like this. And I printed all of those for CPU usage. And those are basically the same tone. And what I did for the main rhythms, if you're interested, is just this preset from STL Tone Hub, the Fatal Bog rhythm. And I just added before the amp an archetype nollie for transposing the part, some EQ, this is probably a match EQ, and a bit of clipping to make the guitar feel a bit smoother before they enter the amp. And for the quad it's basically the same, to be honest. Yeah, same preset. And it's just because it's more of a tight part, so it can be too gainy. But in some parts I added these more gainy quads, and they sound like this. All the guitars together. And what I did to those is adding basically a metal zoom, so they sound bigger and more gainy, as I've said. And let's just hear them in context with those quotes and without those quotes. So with them. And without those. You can hear how that part feels a bit empty without them, and how when I add those, it suddenly feels a lot bigger, a lot heavier. It feels like something big is happening, like the emotional impact of the song is raising up. Then, as I've said, I also added these octave down guitars that just basically overdubbing a part of the chorus, and they sound like this. So very stupid on their own, of course, but I did that because when the chorus hit, I felt like I needed some more weight on the guitars, because basically all of the song is just chugging, but on the chorus we're going with an open string. So of course when you're chugging, there's a lot of low mids and lows that aren't really happening when you're just playing regular stuff. So I didn't want to lose that heaviness that comes from the chugs, so just added an octave down guitar. Let's just hear the part with them and then without them again. Let's hear without them. Again with them on. You can hear how they create a pocket. So every time there's that para, 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 you can hear like the guitars are going a bit up, and you also feel them getting a bit of weight. So it creates also moments. So you can also layer stuff, not only for the actual sound, but only to create a movement. Because a song like this is going to be very smashed on the master, and I didn't master this song, just so you know. But with a song like this, you're going to smash a lot of stuff, saturate a lot of things. So you need to create a movement, not only with automation, but also with layering, in my opinion, so the song doesn't feel stale. Then another thing you can do to make your guitar feel a bit special is, of course, to add lead guitars. And let's hear some of these lead guitars I added. You have this really classic trem lead guitar that happens on the verse. I know it's a very regular stuff to do in modern metal, to add a guitar like this, to add some ambience, some more three-dimensionality to the guitars. Then we also have this lead guitar that happens on the post-breakdown, that is very similar. Very wage war kind of vibe. And those little things, those little moments add to the song. Layering stuff like this, even though you don't really hear it, makes the song feel more interesting, and those little ear candy is what makes a listener come back to the song. And talking about ear candy, we also added this feedback guitar that happens in some part of the song, and it's really just an ear candy, as I've said. So it doesn't really have a melodic part to it, it's just regular guitar feedback, but it adds to the heaviness of some parts. It makes them a bit more interesting, a bit more special, in my opinion. So let's hear this guitar in solo. Sounds like this. Yeah, very distorted, very crushed, but let's hear it in context, actually. Just for a taste of your skin and be gone, I keep avoiding the freedom for birds. Let's hear without it. Pay attention. Just for a taste of your skin and be gone, I keep avoiding the freedom for birds. I mean, it's totally fine, but when you add that, it makes the part feel a bit more special, a bit more unique. Just for a taste of your skin and be gone, I keep avoiding the freedom for birds. I can't destroy it. And as you can see, it continues also into that riff, so it adds to the heaviness. And even though you don't really hear it, your ear is gonna pick up on it. And it also happens in the intro. I'm here to stay for your convenience, your pleasure and your pain. And you can hear in the intro there's just a guitar on the right, so I wanted something also on the left, so I added also some feedback. Then moving on to the bass, I think it's also important to layer some parts in the bass, because that's an instrument that isn't really talked about in metal, because for the most part it just has a supportive role. But in this case I wanted to add something interesting to make some parts stick out more. So this is how the bass sounds on its own. Really scooped, really heavy sound. But in this part, in the second verse, when there's a bit of a break, when there's also that feedback guitars I just showed you, there's also happening this spank bass that I added. And it sounds like this. You can hear how the track adds a bit of attack, a bit of spankiness to the bass, because we wanted to make the bass stick out a bit more in that part, so it doesn't really have a supportive role in that part of the song, because there are no guitars actually. So let's hear it in context. Just for a taste of your skin and be gone, I keep avoiding the freedom for birds. Just a little moment to make the part feel a bit more interesting, make the bass appear for a moment, so there's a bass actually in the song. And finally, in the final breakdown, which is a really heavy one, really big moment of the song, we also have this bass fuzz that sounds like this. together with the other tracks. Makes the bass heavier, also gives it a bit of that mid that it was missing, so it sticks out a bit more in the mix. So let's hear it in context. And without the track. Again, totally fine, but I think it does something. It makes the whole mix feel a bit heavier, it gives it a bit of weight, it makes the bass stick out a bit more, so you have more in-your-face stuff. So, in my opinion, layering in this case is also very important for the emotional impact of the song. Because, you know, without those little things, you wouldn't really feel maybe the heaviness, how it is on the actual track that we put out. Then another instrument where it's crucial layering in modern metal is the drums. And of course, this is something that basically everybody does, adding samples to the kick, to the snare, to the toms, even though I didn't have any samples on the toms. So yeah, that's also really important for having a really big modern sound in metal. And for example, let's just hear the drums with the samples on and then with the samples off. And just so you know, those drums are programmed, so they're gonna sound already pretty good on their own, but you need the samples anyway, in my opinion, if you're going for this really big, really aggressive kind of sound. So let's hear the drums in solo. And now let's hear the drums without any samples. So they already sound pretty good. I didn't go too crazy on the samples because, as I've said, they're already programmed, so you don't need to go too crazy on the samples. But in my opinion, they add a lot of punch, a lot of presence in the actual mix, so you feel the drums making a bit more, you feel them bigger. It really helps to make the drums stick out in a modern metal mix like this. So let's hear again the drums with the samples this time. So for the kick, I added some regular samples, and they sound like this. But I also added this kick click, and this track, even though it's pretty quiet in the mix, it helps to bring the kick a bit forward and give it a bit more attack, so it sticks out a bit more. And it's really important to do this, to just remove all the lows, all the mids, so you just have the attack, the click of the kick. And I don't often do that, but I don't know, I just felt like it added something nice to the overall mix. Then for the snares, that's actually a bit more layering. So we have some regular samples. But we also have a snare room sample. To give some more three-dimensionality to the snare and also to make it stick out a bit more in the mix. So every time it hits, there's like a big explosion. Then we also have this snare attack track that I added because I felt like I was missing some of that transient in the snare when I added some additional processing. So this is actually more of a natural sound, but it's very attacky, as you can hear. And finally, I also added this snare ring, just in the final breakdown, as I said, with the bass to make the emotional impact of the song go up a bit, so it feels heavier, the scene changes a bit, it feels actually like a different part of the song, and it sounds like this. Very crushed, very compressed. Let's hear it in the mix. And you can hear when I take it out, it's not as cool when I have it on. Yeah, in my opinion, the snaring like makes the part feel a lot better. Like feels like it makes the part, in my opinion. It gives sustain to the snare. It makes the snare special, a bit more unique in that part. It makes that riff actually feel different from the rest of the song. Let's hear it again with it on this time. You can hear how the part like suddenly feels heavier, I don't know, just better in my opinion. Then another type of layering, which is really important for modern metal mixes, is vocals. And that is more common in pop, but I don't really see a lot of bands layering a lot of vocals, layering interesting beats and production stuff on vocals in metal, especially in heavier genres. But I think it's really important to make your vocals more interesting and more professional sounding. So this is how the vocals sound on their own.
Once again I'm filled with regret. Once again I feel this pain. Once again I ask for that instead shall I never take me from the loneliness.
So what we did is a really common thing, to just do a main track and then an overdub that does the exact same thing as the main. But we also added some interesting stuff. And of course, we have the classic stereo overdubs that we also did, and we did a lot of those on the chorus, where you can see there. So it creates this kind of crowd effect. Let's hear it in context.
Waiting for the end of my case. You put me through this nightmare.
You can hear how the vocal like suddenly feels bigger, feels wider, and when those overdubs go away, it feels more centered and more in your face. So that's really important also to create those kind of moments, those dynamics in the performance. And on top of that, we also added some interesting stuff, like this whisper track. Let's hear it in solo. And just a simple whisper, very compressed, with some flanger on top of it. We also have an overdub of it. And just to make that part of the vocal feel a bit different, a bit more enigmatic. Then we also have this Vox Lo-Fi in the intro. Let's hear it in context.
I'm here to stay for your convenience, your pleasure and your pain. I'm just addicted to this sickness.
And you know, in cases like this, I would just have the lo-fi vocal. But when I did this, I felt like the vocal wasn't enough in my face, wasn't enough aggressive, because of course you're gonna saturate it a bit, you're gonna make it like that classic telephone speaker effect, but we just it without the main vocal that is here. You don't really have those highs, those that more aggressive vibe. So let's hear only the lo-fi vocal without the main one. And it sounds like this on its own.
I'm here to stay for your convenience, your pleasure and your... I'm just addicted to this.
And you know, it's fine, but to me, it needs that more hi-fi vocal. So by layering those two, you have basically the best of both worlds. So you have that kind of more telephony, more close sound, also more compressed, because you're saturating a bit, so a lot of stuff comes up in the vocal. But you also have that more aggressive vibe that you can really have with a vocal like that, with a lo-fi vocal. And because we have the lo-fi vocal, I didn't do an overdub on the main. I just have this really distorted vocal on just one word to make it pop out.
Your pleasure and your pain, I'm just addicted to this.
You can hear it is just the same chain, but with the capitator turned on. Just on that beat.
Pain. Your pleasure and your pain. I'm just addicted to this.
You know, as I've said, those little moments make the song feel more special and more professional. Because in my opinion, when you have little things that just happen in one time of the song. It makes the overall production feel like you're not overdoing stuff, like you don't really care that you're doing a really interesting thing, but just for 1 second, let's say. You're doing a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of really different sound that happen here and there on the vocal, then on the bass, then on the guitars. It just makes the overall song feel more interactive. And finally, we also have this kind of a verb throw on the end. Very fine on its own, but it's cool in the overall mix. So you know, if it's like it's a person very far away that like is getting stopped or something like that, it wouldn't have the same effect if it was just a main vocal right in your face. And finally, we have effects, so like post-production stuff, and that is also something that I really care about in songs, especially if the song needs to feel modern, and this is one of those songs. And you know, I layered a lot of different impacts, a lot of different sub drops, stuff like that. We also have some extra snares, some extra kicks, some snare bombs. Those are really important in metal, in my opinion. They sound like this. So you can hear in context how the snare feels a lot more bombastic with them on. You can hear that decay far in the back, especially on the final breakdown. And in that part we also have these extra damage snares and kicks, and they sound like this. You know, just to accentuate those hits so they feel extra heavy, extra hard. We also have some ambient stuff in there. You know, very eerie as to the overall vibe of that part. And as I've said, I also layer some hits and risers. Let's hear them all together. So you see, for example, in this part, we have different impacts for different purposes. So we have this impact that is a more transient heavy one, more distorted. For that first impact. Then we have a sub drop for overall weight and decay. I recommend using good headphones or speakers to hear this. And finally, we have a crash for that high end, you know, so it feels like the drummer is hitting those crashes extra hard on the one, and it also gives that more high end impact on the one. So all together. In context. Let's hear without those effects. You can hear how it doesn't have the same impact. It's not as exciting, you know, and it doesn't really connect with the overall vibe of the song. Let's hear again with them on. Yeah, much better, especially in the final breakdown when it needs to have a lot of weight and a lot of impact. You can hear the overall mix like distorting, destroying itself when that first hit happens. And that's because I added this gunshot sample on top of it. Very cool, makes the part feel even heavier, on top of all the impacts I added. And there's also this extra impact right there, cleaner one, so it punches more. And that's it. I hope you liked this video, I hope you found it useful. And as I've said, layering can be a very powerful weapon in modern metal and is very used among professionals. And I advise you to try different layering techniques as I've shown here, but there's also a ton of more. You could also layer some different synths, for example. You could also layer some lead guitars. We only had rhythm layering here, plus some extra leads, but you can also, for example, layer some chords that are doing some higher voicing, then some lower voicing. Same for leads. You could do some octave up, then some octave down guitars, doing the same lead part. So you can really play a lot with layering. And again, I was Federico. Thank you so much for sticking up, and I will see you in the next video.